Today, we are diving into a historical detective story. The main piece of evidence? One of the most influential books ever written. And the mystery? Well, it's a secret that's been hiding in plain sight for about 2,000 years.
So let's just jump right in with this question. I know it sounds a little strange, but just think about it. What if the book we know today once looked different? What if it had different stories, maybe even a completely different timeline? To get to the bottom of this, we have to meet our star witness.
And here he is, Flavius Josephus. This guy was a brilliant historian, living right in the thick of it, at the crossroads of Jewish and Roman culture. He set out to write the definitive history of his people, a massive work called The Antiquities of the Jews. And to do it, he said he was using their own sacred records. And right at the beginning, he made a very bold promise.
He promised to be a faithful copy machine, a straight-down-the-line reporter of the facts. He said he would add nothing and he would take nothing away. It's basically a historian's oath of accuracy. And let me tell you, that promise, it's the key to this entire investigation.
Because, as we're about to find out, when you put his history side by side with the Bible we have on our shelves today, that promise starts to look, well, a little complicated.
Let's put him to the test, shall we? We're going to start with some simple black and white facts and just see if his version of history lines up with the biblical stories we all know. And this, right here, is where our case blows wide open. Because the differences we find, they aren't just minor spelling changes. We're talking about fundamental facts of the story that are just plain different.
Take Abraham's death, for example. The book of Genesis is crystal clear. Abraham lives for 15 years after his grandsons Jacob and Esau are born. He gets to be a grandpa. But in Josephus's history? Nope. He says point blank that the boys were born after Abraham had already died. Okay, maybe a simple chronological error? Could be, but it's not the only one.
Here's another one. Who built the first temple in Jerusalem? The Bible says it was Solomon, but Josephus gives the credit to his father, King David. Now that is not a small detail. That's like confusing who built the Great Wall of China. A pattern is definitely starting to emerge here.
Now, look at how the details of a story we all know, Noah's Ark, just completely shift. In Josephus's version, the ark lands on a very specific mountain. The raven he sends out actually comes back to the ark, and the dove, it only makes one trip, returning with mud and a whole olive branch, not just a leaf. He's telling the same basic story, but it's like we're watching a director's cut with totally different scenes. This shows us that Josephus isn't just making a few mistakes. It really seems like he's working from a different script. But the evidence doesn't stop there. It's not just about altered details. Josephus also includes entire stories, like extra chapters, that are nowhere in our Bible. And at the same time, he just deletes scenes that we think are absolutely central to the plot.
For example, Josephus gives us this incredibly detailed story about Moses as a celebrated Egyptian military general. He describes an entire war in Ethiopia, complete with battlefield strategy, a great victory, and even a royal marriage to an Ethiopian princess. This whole epic story is completely missing from the book of Exodus. So, where in the world did it come from? Well, it turns out this story was well known in other ancient Jewish traditions. For Josephus and people living at that time, these traditions were just as much a real part of Moses' life as the story of the burning bush. He wasn't inventing it, he was including what he and his community considered to be real, authoritative history.
And then you see the other side of the coin, which is just as fascinating. In the biblical story of Dinah, her brothers get their revenge by using this brutal, shocking deception involving circumcision. It's the whole moral core of the drama. But in Josephus's telling, he cuts it out completely. He just replaces it with a simple attack during a festival while everyone's asleep.
This is a massive clue. Why would he do that, especially after promising to take nothing away? Maybe he was just sanitizing the story for his Greco-Roman audience who might not get the cultural significance. But it directly breaks his promise. Unless, of course, the version of the story he was reading from didn't have that detail in it to begin with.
But believe it or not, the most dramatic piece of evidence is still to come. Josephus didn't just alter a few facts and stories. He fundamentally changed the entire timeline of human history itself.
Just look at this chart of the early patriarchs. In the standard Hebrew Bible we use today, Adam has his son Seth when he's 130 years old. But in Josephus's account, he's 230. Do you see the pattern here? With almost every single one of them, Josephus adds exactly 100 years to their age when their first son is born. It's systematic. And the result is absolutely staggering. By the time you get to the Great Flood, Josephus's timeline has added an entire millennium, 1,000 years, to human history. This is not a typo. It is a completely different chronological system. And, interestingly, it aligns very closely with another ancient version of the Bible, the Greek Septuagint.
So what does all this mean? We've got factual contradictions, we've got extra chapters, we've got missing scenes, and a timeline that is off by 1,000 years. Okay, let's solve this mystery. The evidence seems pretty damning, right? Was he just a liar, a really sloppy historian? The temptation is to judge him by today's standards. But if we do that, we miss the whole point. The real answer reveals something incredible about what the Bible itself was like in the ancient world.
All right, so here is the solution. Josephus wasn't a liar, and he wasn't being sloppy. He was actually keeping his promise. He was faithfully reporting from the sacred records that he had in front of him. The reason his history is so different from what we expect is because his sources were different. He was working from a version of the scriptures that we just don't really have anymore.
Historians have a name for this: textual fluidity. You see, back in the 1st century, there wasn't just one Bible. There were multiple, sometimes competing versions of the text, plus all these oral traditions that were considered just as important. And they were all seen as authoritative. Think of it like finding an early draft of a classic novel, with different character arcs and a totally different ending.
You know, the process of deciding which texts would become the final, official version, that's called canonization. And it was a long, messy journey. It took centuries. Josephus was writing right in the middle of that process, not after it was all settled. The text was still in motion. It was still alive.
And this is exactly why he is so incredibly valuable to us. Josephus isn't a bad historian of our Bible. He is a perfect witness to his Bible. He gives us this priceless snapshot of the scriptures at an earlier, more fluid stage of their life, preserving stories and timelines that were otherwise lost to history. So, the big takeaway is this: ancient texts aren't static monuments carved in stone. They're living documents with really complex histories. Josephus basically opens a window into that lost world, and it forces us to ask a really fascinating question. What other ancient secrets are out there, just hiding in plain sight?